The year was 1872, and the sun burned relentlessly over the dry, cracked earth of West Texas. Eliza Carter stood at the edge of her small farm, her hands rough from work, her dress faded from too many washes. She was alone now. Her husband, Thomas, had died 6 months ago in a riding accident, leaving her with nothing but his name and a house full of his family's resentment. Thomas's family had never liked her. They thought she was too quiet, too strange, with her habit of wandering the fields at dusk and her refusal to join in their harsh prayers. Now that Thomas was gone, they barely hid their contempt. His brother, Samuel, glared at her across the dinner table, his voice sharp as a whip when he spoke to her. His mother, Martha, sighed loudly whenever Eliza entered a room, as if her very presence was a burden. The land was just as unforgiving as the people. The crops had withered under the endless drought, and the well water had turned bitter. Cattle grew thin, their ribs pressing against their hides. The settlers whispered that God was punishing them, and when people grew desperate, they always looked for someone to blame. Eliza felt their eyes on her whenever she walked into town. The women clutched their children closer when she passed. The men muttered behind her back, their words just loud enough to hear. Asterisk which. Cursed. Bad luck. Asterisk, she tried to ignore them, to keep her head down and work hard, but the weight of their suspicion pressed down on her like the heavy Texas heat. At night, she lay awake in the small room she had once shared with Thomas, listening to the creak of the house and the distant howl of coyotes. She wondered how much longer she could survive here, surrounded by people who hated her, in a land that seemed determined to break her. She had no family of her own to turn to, no friends in the settlement. She was trapped, and the air was thick with the unspoken threat of what might happen if the drought continued, if the sickness spreading through town grew worse, if the people decided they had waited long enough to rid themselves of the woman they believed had brought them nothing but suffering. Little did she know, the storm was coming sooner than she thought. The air in the settlement had grown thick with tension, like the heavy stillness before a storm. Eliza moved through her days like a shadow, careful not to draw attention, but the whispers followed her wherever she went. Then one evening everything changed. It started with the children. Little Jacob and Mary, the miller's youngest, woke in the night screaming with fever. By morning, their skin was burning hot, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. The settlement's doctor, a weary man with few real medicines, could do nothing. By sundown, both children were dead. Fear spread faster than the sickness. The settlers gathered in the churchyard, their faces pale in the lantern light. Samuel stood before them, his voice loud and shaking with false grief. "This is no natural illness," he declared. "This is the work of evil." His eyes swept the crowd and landed on Eliza, who stood at the edge of the gathering, her arms wrapped around herself. A woman in the crowd cried out, "The Carter girl was at the well yesterday. I saw her." Others joined in. "She was muttering to herself," said one. "She looked right at my baby and smiled strange," claimed another. The lies piled up like kindling waiting for a spark. Eliza's heart pounded as the crowd turned toward her. "I didn't," she started, but Samuel cut her off. "Which?" he spat, and the words seemed to hang in the air. Hands grabbed her, pulling her forward. Someone tied her wrists with rough rope. The crowd jostled her, their faces twisted in anger and fear. A stone struck her shoulder, then another grazed her cheek. They dragged her to the center of town where the ground was hard and bare. People lined up, their hands full of rocks. Samuel stood before her, a large stone in his grip. "Confess your sins," he demanded, "and maybe God will have mercy on your soul." Eliza lifted her chin. "I've done nothing wrong," she whispered. Samuel's face darkened. He raised the stone higher. The crowd pressed closer. Eliza closed her eyes, waiting for the pain to come. Then, from beyond the settlement, a sound cut through the night, the thunder of horses, the high cry of a warrior's call. The crowd stilled. Heads turned, and into the circle of light rode a band of Comanche warriors, their painted faces fierce in the firelight. At their head was a man whose gaze locked onto Eliza with startling intensity. The stone fell from Samuel's hand as the warrior spoke. "This woman," he said in rough but clear English, "is mine." And just like that, the death the settlers had planned for Eliza was no longer in their hands. The night air crackled with tension as the Comanche warriors circled the stunned settlers. Horses stamped impatiently, their breath curling like smoke in the torchlight. Eliza remained frozen on her knees, her bound wrists throbbing, unable to comprehend why these strangers had intervened. Thakaka dismounted with the easy grace of a man who'd spent his life in the saddle. The painted lines across his face made his expression unreadable as he approached Samuel. Though shorter than the settler, his presence made Samuel step back involuntarily. "This woman comes with us," Thakaka stated. His English carried the weight of command, though the words came slowly. Samuel's face twisted in outrage. "She's our criminal. She poisoned." A warrior's arrow thudded into the dirt between Samuel's boots before he could finish. The message was clear. Eliza gasped as Thakaka's knife flashed in the firelight. He severed her bonds with one quick motion, the blade cold against her skin. When she tried to stand, her legs buckled from fear and exhaustion. Without hesitation, Thakaka caught her arm, his grip firm but not cruel. The settlers murmured angrily, but didn't interfere as he lifted Eliza onto his horse. She clutched the animal's mane, her mind reeling. Was she being saved only to face something worse? As they rode into the darkness, the settlement's torches dwindled behind them. The Comanche warriors moved silently through the night, their horses sure-footed on the rocky terrain. Eliza risked a glance at her rescuer's profile, searching for some clue to his motives. Then she saw the faint scar above his right eyebrow. Memory struck like lightning. 7 years ago, she'd found a wounded boy near the creek, his leg bleeding from a trap. Though terrified, she'd brought him water and wrapped the injury with strips from her petticoat. He'd disappeared by morning, leaving only a small carved arrowhead behind, one she'd kept hidden in her sewing box all these years. The warrior met her gaze, and in that moment Eliza knew he remembered too. This wasn't random mercy. This was a debt being repaid. The horses picked up speed, carrying her further from everything she'd ever known. Behind them, no one gave chase. The settlers' shouts faded into the wind, swallowed by the vast Texas night. The horses moved like shadows through the moonlit prairie, their hooves whispering through dry grass. Eliza clung to the warrior's waist, her fingers gripping the fringed edges of his buckskin shirt. Every muscle in her body ached from the day's terror, yet adrenaline kept her alert. She dared not speak, not when the night itself seemed to hold its breath around these fierce riders. As they traveled further from the settlement, the land changed. The scraggly, drought-starved trees gave way to open plains where the wind ran wild and unchecked. The air smelled different here, cleaner, carrying the scent of sage and earth rather than wood smoke and despair. When dawn painted the horizon in pale gold, Thakaka finally signaled the warriors to stop near a shallow creek. Eliza slid from the horse, her legs trembling as her feet touched unfamiliar ground. The Comanche men moved with quiet purpose, watering their horses and scanning the distance with sharp eyes. None approached her except Thakaka, who crouched by the water's edge and motioned for her to drink. Eliza knelt beside him, the creek's coolness stinging her scraped palms. As she cupped the water to her lips, she caught her reflection wild-eyed, her hair tangled with twigs and dust, the bruise from a thrown stone darkening her cheekbone. She looked like a woman already half gone from the world she knew. Thakaka watched her with an unreadable expression. When she finally met his gaze, he reached into a pouch at his belt and produced a small, familiar object, the arrowhead she'd left by the wounded boy all those years ago. Its edges were worn smooth from handling. "You kept it," she whispered. He nodded once, then spoke in slow, careful words. "You gave water. I give life." The simple truth of it settled over her. This man, this warrior feared by settlers across the territory, had risked his people's safety to honor a debt from childhood. The realization made her throat tighten. Around them, the other warriors began mounting up again. Thakaka stood and offered his hand. Eliza hesitated only a moment before taking it. Wherever this path led, it had to be better than stones and ropes and the hollow-eyed stares of people who'd wanted her dead. As they rode east toward the rising sun, Eliza made a silent promise to herself she would learn this new world or die trying. The sun hung low in the sky when they finally reached the Comanche encampment. Eliza's body ached from hours in the saddle, her muscles stiff and unaccustomed to riding. As they crested a grassy rise, the village spread before her, a collection of buffalo-hide teepees arranged in a wide circle, their painted designs glowing in the golden light. Horses grazed in a makeshift corral, their coats sleek and well cared for. The smell of wood smoke and roasting meat carried on the wind. Women paused in their work to watch the riders approach, their eyes lingering on Eliza with open curiosity. Children darted between the tents, their laughter cutting through the tension that had settled in Eliza's chest. She had expected hostility, but the camp hummed with life in a way her settlement never had. Thakaka dismounted first, then turned to help her down. Her legs nearly gave way beneath her, but his grip on her arms steadied her. He spoke to the warriors in their language, his tone firm. A few exchanged glances, but none challenged him. An older woman with streaks of silver in her braids stepped forward. Her eyes, sharp as flint, studied Eliza before she addressed Thakaka. Though Eliza couldn't understand their words, the woman's tone carried authority. Thakaka responded calmly, gesturing to Eliza, then to the arrowhead he still carried. The woman's expression softened slightly. She turned to Eliza and placed a weathered hand on her own chest. "Nomo," she said, then gestured to the camp around them. "Nomo tekwapa." Eliza understood. "These are the people." The woman then touched Eliza's shoulder lightly and said, "Tahuya." Thakaka nodded. "Your name here," he explained. "Tahuya" means saved one. Eliza no. Tahuya now repeated the word softly, testing the sound of it. The woman, who she would later learn was called Pabi, gave a small, approving smile before leading her toward one of the larger teepees. Inside, the space was warm and surprisingly spacious. Buffalo robes lined the floor, and bundles of herbs hung drying from the support poles. Pabi motioned for her to sit, then brought her a bowl of stew. The rich scent of meat and wild roots made Eliza's stomach growl. She hadn't realized how hungry she was until that moment. As she ate, Pabi watched her with quiet assessment. When Eliza finished, the older woman took the bowl and handed her a soft buckskin dress, gesturing for her to change out of her torn settler's clothes. For the first time since the stones had been raised against her, Eliza felt something unfamiliar, not quite safety, not yet, but the fragile beginnings of acceptance. Outside, the sounds of the camp continued, children laughing, horses nickering, the low murmur of voices. She was a stranger here, an outsider in a world she didn't yet understand. But as Pabi began to hum softly while stirring a pot over the fire, Eliza dared to hope that, in time, she might find a place among these people. And if she didn't, well, she had already faced death once. Whatever came next, she would meet it with her chin held high. Weeks passed, and the rhythm of Comanche life began to seep into Eliza's bones. She woke with the sun, helped Pabi grind corn into meal, and learned to tan hides without wasting a single scrap of the buffalo. The women taught her words in the Comanche tongue, laughing good-naturedly when she mispronounced them. The children, once shy, now tugged at her skirts, begging her to join their games. But peace was fragile. One evening, as the camp prepared for a celebration, Thakaka returned from a scouting ride with his face grim. He spoke quietly with the elders near the central fire, their expressions hardening as he delivered his news. Eliza, now called Tahuya by all, felt the shift in the air before Pabi even took her aside. "The white men come," Pabi said, her voice low. "They follow your trail." Eliza's hands stilled on the buckskin she was stitching. "Samuel." Pabi nodded. "They bring many guns. They want you back or dead." The firelight suddenly felt too hot against Eliza's skin. She had known this might happen, had dreamed of angry voices and flying stones more nights than she cared to admit. But now her nightmare threatened the only people who had shown her kindness since Thomas died. Thakaka approached, his war paint already applied in bold streaks across his face and chest. "We ride at dawn," he told her in careful English. "You stay with the women and children. Go north to the canyon lands if fighting comes." Eliza stood abruptly, knocking over her sewing basket.
"No."
The word came out sharper than she intended. "I won't hide while others fight my battles." A murmur rippled through those nearby. Comanche women did not ride to war, but the fire in Eliza's voice gave even the warriors pause. Thakaka studied her for a long moment before speaking to Pabi in rapid Comanche. The older woman clicked her tongue, but finally nodded. "Come," Pabi said, leading Eliza to her teepee. From a painted chest, she produced a bow and a quiver of arrows. "You learn fast, but war is not sewing hides." Eliza took the weapons with steady hands. She had practiced with the girls for sport, but this was different. The bow felt suddenly heavy with purpose. That night, as the camp prepared for battle, Eliza sat apart from the others, running her fingers over the fletching of each arrow. She thought of Samuel's hateful glare, of the stones in his hands, of the way her own people had turned on her without hesitation. A shadow fell across her lap. Thakaka stood before her, holding out a knife with a bone handle.
"For close fighting," he said.
When she took it, he didn't immediately let go. "You shoot from the ridge. Do not go down unless I fall." The unspoken words hung between them if he fell. All was lost anyway. Eliza slid the knife into her belt. "I won't let them take me alive." Thakaka's mouth tightened, but he didn't argue. As he turned to leave, the first scouts came running into camp, their warnings sharp in the night air. The settlers had arrived early. Somewhere beyond the circle of teepees, a rifle shot cracked through the darkness. The battle for her new life had begun. The gunshot echoed across the camp like a crack of thunder. Eliza's heart pounded as warriors scrambled for their horses, their war cries cutting through the chaos. Women hurried children toward the safety of the trees while the men formed a protective line at the edge of the village. Thakaka mounted his horse in one fluid motion, his painted face fierce in the torchlight. He locked eyes with Eliza one last time before galloping toward the fray. She clutched her bow, her fingers trembling not from fear but from fury. These men had come to drag her back to death. They would not take her without a fight. Eliza climbed the rocky ridge overlooking the camp, her breath coming fast. Below, the battle raged. Settlers on horseback fired rifles into the chaos, their faces twisted with hate. The Comanche warriors moved like shadows, their arrows finding their marks with deadly precision. Samuel led the charge, his voice roaring above the gunfire as he searched for her. She notched an arrow, drew back the bowstring, and let it fly. The shot went wide, but it caught Samuel's attention. His head snapped toward the ridge, his eyes burning with recognition. He spurred his horse forward, dodging arrows as he climbed toward her. Eliza fired again. This time, the arrow grazed his arm. He barely flinched. Her hand steadied. She had one arrow left. Samuel dismounted a few yards away, his rifle raised. "You belong with your people," he snarled. Eliza's grip tightened on the bow. "You stopped being my people the moment you picked up that stone." Before Samuel could fire, an arrow pierced his shoulder from behind. He staggered, his rifle falling into the dirt. Thakaka stood a few paces away, his bow still drawn. Samuel snarled and reached for his pistol, but Eliza was faster. She lunged, driving her bone-handled knife into his thigh. Samuel howled in pain, collapsing to his knees. Below, the settlers were retreating, their numbers dwindling under the Comanches' relentless defense. The fight was over. Thakaka hauled Samuel up by his collar and threw him toward his horse. "Tell your people," he growled, "the next time they come for Tahuya, none will ride back alive." Samuel spat blood, but didn't argue. He mounted clumsily and rode after his fleeing men, his shoulders hunched in defeat. Silence settled over the camp. The wounded were tended to, the dead honored. Eliza stood at the edge of the ridge, watching the dust from the settlers' retreat fade into the horizon. Pobby joined her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You fight well," she said simply. Thakaka approached, his war paint smeared with sweat and dirt. He studied Eliza for a long moment before speaking. "You stay now. Not as captive. Not as outsider. As Nomo." Eliza no. Tahuya looked out at the land that had become her home, at the people who had risked everything for her. She had been given a second life, one she would not waste. She nodded. "I stay." And so she did. The end.